I kind of made a little vow to myself that when I got in this position, that was something that I wanted to implement to make sure that our first impression is a good one. We want to show people that we're welcoming them and we want them to be here. I think that goes miles above than, hey, here's a free lunch today type of thing.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Hey there, clean freaks. This is Hank Balch. You're listening to Beyond Clean Season 24. The papers that make us awesome. And today we're going to be speaking with Meredith Garza, the market development lead at Ascension, Texas, on the topic of onboarding and orientation for sterile processing professionals. So hang with us. If you're sitting there like, I've already been oriented, I've already been onboarded 20 years ago, what do I need to listen to this episode for? I'm going to tell you, there's some insights and some nuggets and some things that you may agree or disagree with on this show. So we've got something for you. And if you're tuning in brand new, maybe you're considering entering into sterile processing, you're like, hey, that sounds like a good episode to listen to. Or perhaps you're in the middle of your orientation process as we speak. This is still going to be a good episode for you to learn some of the gaps that may be already in your orientation that you've already encountered. Tune into this show and hopefully you'll have some insights you can take back to your educator and be like, hey, I just listened on Beyond Clean. I need to make sure to do this, or maybe not to do this. And most importantly, I think you need to tune in to learn how to make sure everyone coming into this industry and this career has a good experience in their first day, their first week, their first month, in their first year on the job in SPD, because we want these folks to stick with us for the long term. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break with Meredith Garza.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, and joining us in studio now is Meredith Garza, the market development lead at Ascension, Texas. She's not too far down the road from me. I'm in College Station these days, so a little bit between Houston and Austin. And you're kind of in the central Texas area. They call it Meredith, out there toward Austin. She's also a member of the Beyond Clean Advisory Group. You've probably seen her out there through LinkedIn, commenting and adding value to the sterile processing discussions. And, many of you may just know her from the industry because she's been in the SPD space for a number of years. And we're going to be talking today about the topic of orientation and onboarding in sterile processing. So Meredith, welcome to your very first Beyond Clean podcast.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So for folks who don't know exactly what a market development lead does, can you explain what your daily duties are in that role?
Sure. So essentially it is a network educator. So my responsibility is to go to the various hospitals and provide education through in-services, help onboard new staff, help them with their educational files, and also make sure that they are Joint Commission ready as needed. Or if they are having issues with bioburden or employee training, they'll call me and have me do assessments and help them figure out some solutions.
Yeah. So kind of like a blend between a consultant, an educator, kind of / manager, director, depending on, what's exactly going on in the department that they need your help around. So that sounds like a really fun role. And obviously, you're the exact kind of person that I want to be talking to about this episode of onboarding and orientation. Like I mentioned right before the episode started, this is a big conversation. It could take us probably 12 episodes to really talk to and answer every question that I want to answer. But for today's episode, we got about 20, 30 minutes here. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Maybe this is where I like to start with this question, is the who behind orientation and onboarding. One of the who's we know, it's the new technician that's getting this onboarding and orientation. But the other who I would like your insight around, and that's the who is involved in creating and writing these documents that we use to go through this orientation onboarding process.
So in every facility, it's going to vary based on what roles they have. In a perfect world, every facility would have an education coordinator that is responsible for laying out the training, for documenting everything, and being that new associate's point of contact for all things training, their go-to person that helps them get into the culture of the department, learn the skills that they need to. But in places where that isn't an option because of the size of the department or anything like that, a lot of times that's relegated to a supervisor or maybe someone that precepts part of the time, someone that's a very strong technician that has shown the ability to do some of that training. As far as who creates it, again, it's going to vary by department. Some of the managers like to do it themselves. At one of our bigger facilities, we have an education coordinator that came up with a wonderful, very thorough program for technicians that have never done this before. So taking them through all of the steps of inspection of instruments and identification of instruments, and then decon and sterilization, sterile storage. It works very well there, but it's going to depend on the facility and the size of the facility.
Yeah, I'd liken this conversation and a lot of related conversations to the idea of a train that's already left the station. It's already rumbling down the track. And then we kind of look around and say, hey, does anyone know where this train is going or how fast it's going or if we wanted to change the direction it's going, how do we do that? Because it's kind of it's already on the way. And, orientation, onboarding, documentation in particular, like you alluded to, many times it's kind of already created for us. If we're hired on to a new role as a supervisor or as a lead tech or even as an educator, we walk in and there's already documentation. The train has already left the station. There's already a plan and a process. But sometimes, and maybe even many times, we kind of see that documentation for the first time and we're like, I would like to improve this or change this. Is that just my experience or is that a common experience that you've seen out there in the industry in your years of experience?
Absolutely a common experience. When I was working in the department full time as a lead tech and then a supervisor, I changed some of the training. And then, as I alluded to earlier, the education coordinator here at one of our bigger facilities, there wasn't really a training program per se. So she took something that had been created from another Ascension facility and made it work for her facility. Since that time, I've started putting that into the other facilities in our network in Texas. And then for the ones that have education coordinators, I gave it to them and said, okay, make this fit what your needs are because you guys are here every day. You know your needs best. For the places that don't have an education coordinator on site, I worked with the supervisor or the manager and said, okay, how do you want your new folks onboarded, whether they have experience or whether they don't. And, you know, what are your expectations that will get through in the first day, first couple of days, first month until they're fully onboarded. So we've gone through that cycle of change here, and we'll continue to.
Yeah, let me ask you, just for the purposes of definitions, and I'll give you my definition, and then you can tell me if you agree or disagree, if you want to nuance them. But in this episode, you know, when I titled this discussion, I did title it Onboarding and Orientation in SPD, knowing that, you know, those two words actually can mean different things. And in my mind, onboarding is that initial kind of set up, you know, stage, kind of how you alluded to, is do they have their badge? What scrubs do they need? Are we assigning them a locker? Do they know how to find the cafeteria? Do they know the fire exits and the emergency exits if anything goes wrong like that? And then the orientation, though, is a much longer season of becoming more and more competent and confident in all these areas of our department. And depending on, like you said, if they're coming in brand new to the industry, that's going to look a little bit different than if they're coming in, you know, with 5 or 10 years experience just from another facility and now they're working at our facility. Is that how you would define those two terms, or do you nuance them and use them differently?
No, I define it the same way you did. That onboarding is that initial, you know, your first couple of days. All right, let's get your computer trainings done. Let's show you the locker room, where you change, where you get your scrubs, where to park. Because in Central Texas, in some places, that can be a little bit of a challenge.
Is the answer in Central Texas. You park in the shade, no matter how much further you have to walk.
Or, you know, the parking garage 2 blocks away.
That's right.
Central Austin is exploding right now. So even those little things. So one of the things that I do for some of the facilities is before their first day, I know the manager reaches out to them and says, hey, how's it going? You know, we're glad to have you aboard. I also do that as well and introduce myself. I also say, okay, these are your steps for your first day. These are the links that you'll need to get online. This is when we expect you to be on campus. This is where you park. Here's my contact information if you have any questions. And a lot of the people that have onboarded since have really seemed to appreciate that, because it always seems so much of a confusion. Where do I park? Where do I go? Who do I talk to when I get here? And I wanted to make sure that all of that information was in one place for them so that they could reference it, number one. And number two, it's like, okay, this is where I'm going. And it's just that initial, oh, I feel welcome. I'm already starting to feel part of that team because they're valuing that, and they're trying to allay as much confusion as possible, because that first day is always very hectic.
Hugely important approach to that, because this kind of goes back to an episode we did a couple seasons ago. I forget the guest name, but the title of the episode was Demographic Drought, and it was just talking about the changing demographics in the U.S. and the job market. And this isn't news to anyone, but sterile processing is struggling to find people these days and hire people these days. And so when we do finally get through all those hoops, get the position approved to rehire, we get it posted, we get it interviewed, we decide on the one we want, we make them the offer, they accept, we get their start date, they show up, and then to your point, they're going to show up and have 1 or 2 experience. Either number one is going to be your experience that you just outlined. They're going to come in, they're going to feel welcome, they're going to feel like they're prepared, that they're expected, and that they're a part of the team already. Or they're going to have another experience, which is also very common, sadly, is they're going to show up and everyone's going to act like, you know, who is this guy or who is this gal? And they're like, I don't have time for you. I'm too busy. I got things going on. You know, like, go sit in this corner on this computer for the next 8 hours. And when you're done, come tell me, and then I'll show you how to get home and maybe get your parking validator, maybe not. And yeah, that's the first day experience. And then we wonder why some of these folks are like, I don't know if I actually want to work here, if I actually want to do this thing, if this is the way and the culture that I'm going to be exposed to. So I think your approach, Meredith, is really important to look beyond all the paperwork that needs to be done, which it does need to be done, and all the checkboxes need to be checked. But also remember, this is a human that's coming into our space, and we owe it to them for all the cultural things I just mentioned to intentionally try to make them feel welcomed. And that's hard when we got a lot of other competing interests going on in sterile processing. It's already busy. It's already short-staffed. Maybe you don't have a dedicated educator, and yet we still got to find a way to get it done.
Yes. And actually, I drew from my own experience, because that always seemed to be a gap to me, is when I would onboard with a new place or when I'd get hired, it's, okay, what do I do on my first day? Where do I go? Who do I call when I'm here? Because we're all behind restricted areas. It's not like I can just walk in or walk to the floor or whatever and go, oh, this is where I need to be. Hey, I'm here for my first day. It was, who do I talk to? And it always gave me pause when new people would come in and start and they wouldn't know where to go, who to talk to. So I kind of made a little vow to myself that when I got in this position, that was something that I wanted to implement to make sure that our first impression is a good one. We want to show people that we're welcoming them and we want them to be here. I think that goes miles above than, hey, here's a free lunch today type of thing.
Right. Yeah, here's a free lunch to go eat by yourself in the cafeteria. I hope you enjoy it. So, let's talk here about the contents of that orientation process itself. And you gave some good examples about, who should be involved in this process, how to make changes, and that's a living document. This isn't something that you create 10 years ago and you never look at it again, you never touch it again, and it never changes. But I want to talk about how you, in creating these documents or, continue to update these documents, how you ensure that the new staff member, let's call him Johnny, that by the time Johnny gets done, he's been oriented effectively to every area of the department that he needs to be without any major gaps. So how do you approach that, or what strategies or best practices have you seen that work to make sure that we don't let anyone out of that orientation phase until they're actually ready?
So at the big site that we have, the person that went through it, the education coordinator here, was actually my very first student. So I'm going to brag on her a little bit. She went through all phases of our process, from assembly to decontam to sterilization to case carts. And she even broke down assembly into the different service lines. And she decided that, okay, we're going to spend a week on this service line, a week on this service line. Now, again, this is a very large facility, so they have that bandwidth that, number one, they're almost always going to have enough sets that people can focus for a whole week on a particular service line. And then once they've gone through assembly, then, okay, now we spend a couple weeks in decontam. And the first part of the decontam orientation is making sure they know how to wipe down the case cards, make sure they're checking stuff into SensaTrack, and which shelf does it go on? Does it go to the side where we're just doing our hand wash with our cameras and light cords, or does it go to the instrument side? And then she brings them through that side of just what they call the wipe down sink. And they practice that for a while until they're comfortable. And then they go on the other side and they practice the instrument side until they're comfortable. And then they go through sterilization and then case carts. Now, that also is going to depend on the needs of the department, but we document every step. And she has regular check-ins with them. Number one, to make sure that they're still feeling comfortable and confident. Number two, it's if she's noticing any issues or areas for opportunity, she's going to sit there and work with them on that as well. And that's done at a pretty regular occurrence. We try to do it once a week, but that can be a little overwhelming sometimes. So she sits down with them regularly, and they do not come off of orientation until all of that paperwork is completed with a date and all of their competencies are checked off as well. And that's the last step, is going through those competencies and making sure that those are all checked off.
Yeah, that's not an important point there and a great insight that I want folks to take away from this is, two things were happening during that process that you described. Number one, we're asking the technician, how do they feel? And how confident and competent do they feel in this process? And then number two, we're also kind of asking the lead tech or the preceptor or the trainer, what gaps do you see? And where do you see opportunity? Because if those two things don't line up, maybe the technician's like, oh, yeah, I got this. Tam, how hard is this? It's just kind of spraying things. But the preceptor's like, yeah, but you've only been doing the hand wash sink or the wipe down sink. You haven't even touched, this other side. It's important, to meet those two together, because at the end of the day, you do want a confident technician. But if they're new to the industry, obviously they don't know what they don't know. And it's only that preceptor, that educator that can kind of come alongside and be like, yeah, you're doing great, but you're still about 50% of the way there for the things that you need to learn that we know that you may encounter even if you haven't seen them yet. So I think that's a really helpful approach. And then, of course, that competency piece on the back end of the orientation is key, which kind of brings me up to my next question. I've seen this even way back 15 years ago when I was a new technician, and even newer technicians were being hired in behind me. And that's a great feeling, right? When you're no longer the newest person on the job. You're like, I used to be the new guy, not the new guy anymore. But the temptation, even back then, and I know it has just continued with the amount of short staffing that we have, is to short circuit this onboarding and orientation process, because things get busy, people call out, it never seems to get easier. And the easiest thing in the world is just to be like, yeah, just throw them hack and decontam and we'll call them good. What words of encouragement or direction or insight would you give to departments that are tempted to do that? And is there any way around that, to solve that issue?
It is definitely an opportunity that I see here in Texas as well, for those exact same reasons, because part of the thing is we do have to balance the needs of the department with that onboarding and that training and that orientation. And I have seen where people can get pigeonholed. It's like, oh, this person is really great at pulling case carts. And, oh, this person called out. So, hey, we're just going to put this person in case carts. And it takes some realization. And this is where the department educators really need to kind of stand firm and be like, okay, I understand that we need this person in case carts. However, they still need X, Y, and Z on their training. And we really we owe it to them to make sure that we are giving them every opportunity to do all of the training that is needed, especially for someone that is brand new, because I'm not quite sure how it is out in College Station, but here in Central Texas, we are seeing a lot of people come in from the complete outside. We're like everywhere, we're struggling to get certified technicians. So we're having to bring people in on the ground floor, which is great, because then we can get them trained and we can make sure that they're not developing bad habits. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we are showing them everything and giving them that opportunity to learn everything. So I think it's really incumbent upon the educators in the department to sit down with the leadership team and say, okay, I know that we've got some shortness of staff here, but I really need to make sure that before we complete this person's orientation, that they have the time to learn this other skill that they've not been able to yet.
Yeah, we talk a lot on the podcast network about the courage to step up and stop the line. Typically we're talking about, hey, if you see like a bad practice happening, or if you see a questionable instrument, or you don't see, some kind of compliance happening. But what you were just describing was that confidence to stand up and stop the line in the orientation process if you see it beginning to be short-circuited, like you said. And that's kind of typically in my experience, it happens slower. It's not like everyone announces, hey, we're not going to finish Johnny's orientation, just so everyone knows. It's just like it never finishes, and he never gets those final check marks on all these areas. And so what happens is he ends up graduating into these roles and normal assignments, but then he's got these knowledge gaps that can be really critical and lead to all kinds of issues and errors, very basic things that could have and should have been covered in the orientation had it not been short-circuited. So that's a great call out. It's just, hey, we've got to have courage, especially on the part of that educator, that preceptor, that manager, whoever responsibility it is to have this person complete that training and to sign off those competencies to be like, this cannot be an ongoing practice. So maybe in the interest of time, we're already just about done here, but I got to ask you the question that almost every C-suite leader asks their manager or their director or their market development lead at some point or another. And the question is, Meredith, how long does it take to train a sterile processing technician? You mentioned you got a lot of folks coming in from the outside, brand new to the industry. How long is this orientation going to take?
That is a question I've gotten.
Oh, no. This is real life here.
In my opinion, and stemming from my own coming into this many, many years ago, we're not going to say how many, kind of from outside. For my own, it took me a year to really feel comfortable. Now, I understand that there are pressures. For most of our sites, we try to do a minimum, especially for these brand new folks, a minimum of 3 months before flying on your own. And depending on the person, it can be up to, 4, 5, 6 months for them to really feel, okay, I've got this. But really, to me, it's that first year. Yes, you might have signed off their competencies at the end of 3 months, but I think it's important that we check in on them periodically. And, whether that's a skills check by auditing their trays or just checking in and saying, hey, are you still good? Are there things that you've come across that you were not sure about? And of course, make it very apparent that they always have the ability to ask questions regardless. The educator at our big site is constantly getting asked questions from people who have been doing this for a minute. She gets questions from me as I'm auditing trays and going, hey, is this okay for this site? Because it's very site dependent. And of course, it is going to depend on that person. I've seen people that are super motivated that can move through those checklists and feel very comfortable and confident in a matter of a couple of months. But I caution, just taking the reins off and going, here you go, fly. I really think it takes up to a year.
Yeah, that is not, and I'll just speak from my own experience, that's not what administrators want to hear. They all want to hear
I'm aware.
as quick as possible. It really leads us into a much longer conversation than we have time to on this particular episode, but it goes to a big distinction in the industry around how sterile processing folks are prepared for this career. We're not coming out of nursing school. We're not coming out of any like surgical tech training program. At the very least, we may be coming out already certified through an online training school or something else, but that's if you're lucky. But still, that training program might have taken them 3 months, to go through the textbook, but then they still don't have any hands-on training. And that's 400 hours all by itself if you're sitting for one of the certification exams. To your point, though, that's just, baseline, baby competency. Do we really trust them in these critical situations, emergency situations? Can they be by themselves? Do they know how to work through these issues just after 3 months or just after 4 months? So I'm with you on the year. If you're coming in from zero, to get you to where I'm willing to confidently say, this person has got it under control, it's going to take us 12 months, boss. And, you may not like it, but that's the reality of it. And yet, it does depend, to your point, on the person that's being trained, as well as the resources that are made available for the training. How good is the orientation paperwork? How capable is a preceptor? How protected is their time? We didn't even really get into that, but how many times were we like, we got one preceptor and we got 4 people training in 3 different areas of the department, and it's the best we can do. Like everyone kind of understands that, but that's going to impact the pace of training substantially. So tons of great topics to continue these conversations, Meredith. Maybe we'll have you back in a future episode or blog content or panel discussions, but there's a lot of things still left to discuss. But I think you did a great introduction here for the show, especially your first time up to the mic. So really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm more than happy to come back. And like you said, this is a topic that we could discuss at length. And there's a lot to it.
That was Meredith Garza, the Market Development Lead for Ascension, Texas, talking about orientation and onboarding in sterile processing. I'm glad she answered that last question in the way she did. That is the magic question these days. How long does it take to train a sterile processing professional? Especially, it depends, right? How much experience do they have? How driven are they? Just like those examples that she gave. But also, part of the answer is forever. It's going to take forever because there is no arriving at this final knowledge of education and everything there is to know in sterile processing. Of course, my question was, how long is it going to take to really have them baseline competent? And I tend to agree. I think that 1 year timeline is a reasonable timeline, bringing someone completely off the street, getting all of the medical terminology, all the quality, all the focus, all the attention to detail, everything that you need to know and to do. It's going to take a while, and you just need that exposure. So I think 1 year is completely reasonable, even though most administrators in your health system will probably have their eyes glaze over if you ever told them that. But, don't be afraid. I've told administrators that in my career as well. Listen, this ain't a 3-month thing. We're not taking folks that are coming in who've already done, 2 years of nursing school or 2 years of surgical tech school or 2 years of sterile processing school, because those things don't really exist in the way that they do in these other career paths. So we have to do all the training, all the education, all the orienting in our department, hands-on, on-the-job training, and that just takes time, and it's going to take longer the fewer resources that you give us. If we don't have a dedicated educator, if we don't even have an education room, if we're constantly being pulled back into staffing, all those things just expand that time, and that's how we end up with 12 months or more. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. I'd love to hear what you have to say about the topic. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can contact Meredith through LinkedIn as well. Stay tuned. We've got a terrific rest of the season still in store for you. The papers that make us awesome in sterile processing Beyond Clean Season 24. But until we talk to you again next week, as we say all the time here at Beyond Clean, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.